In 1804, Serbs began a war for independence. Led by brilliant commanders, they won victory after victory, beating odds of 4-1, using everything from guerrilla warfare to frontal warfare, adapting to events in the most unstable time for Europe, and turning it into a major regional conflict and the eventual collapse of the Ottoman Sultanate. After the Battle of Ivankovac, the Serbs launched a counteroffensive. They captured Poreč, Kruševac and Aleksinac, which made their southern and eastern frontier a much better defensive position. They also constructed fortifications at Deligrad, which will prove crucial. In response, Ottomans began preparing for their own new offensive with 4 armies. 18,000 from Vidin under Hafiz Pasha, 55,000 from Niš under Ibrahim Pasha, 40,000 from Bosnia under Suleiman Pasha Skopjak, and 7,000 from Srebrenica under Hadži Beg. First, on the 24th of June, Milenko Stojković successfully repulsed the army of Vidin at Poreč, since most of its commanders deserted and refused to fight. Then, the Bosnian armies crossed into Serbian territory and pushed the Serbs back. They pillaged villages and stole whatever they could. At the time, Karađorđe stationed his army in the south, anticipating the advance of the Ottoman army of Niš. But when he got news from Jakov Nenadović of the advance, he immediately redirected his troops to confront the new threat. Karađorđe attacked the army of Srebrenica and defeated it on the 1st of August at Bratačići, after which it retreated. Skopjak didn't sit still. He began to march towards Belgrade, but his army was ambushed during the night, forcing him to retreat to Šabac and await a better opportunity. On the 9th of August, the Serbian army arrived at Mišar. This time, unlike at Ivankovac, they avoided spreading their forces into multiple redoubts, and instead focused on a single strong defensive position on elevated ground. In total, they had 7,000 foot soldiers and 4 cannons, which would come of great use. 3 days later, Skopjak attacked the Serbian army. Initially, only the cavalry attacked, but they fell into holes with stakes, and the Serbs opened a devastating volley from their muskets and forced the cavalry to fall back. However, the infantry soon joined the attack, and the cavalry organized in lines to avoid falling into holes. Their attack was much stronger. A brutal melee followed, some still firing their muskets, but the attack was repulsed. After this, Skopjak realized his army was demoralized by their defeats, so he dispatched imams and dervishes to quote verses from the Quran. Furthermore, Kulin Kapetan, a respected leader from the Vilayet of Bosnia, came forward to lead the cavalry in person. They attacked once more. Both sides fought viciously. Turkish troops charged into the fortification whose palisade was destroyed from constant fighting and artillery. It appeared that the Ottoman army was gaining the upper hand and would get their first major victory in the conflict. But then, Karađorđe ordered 2 cannons to fire at the forest south of their position. Suddenly, 2,000 Serbian cavalry appeared on the battlefield. They split into 2 groups. The first, led by Luka Lazarević, charged into the fighting to help their fellow soldiers, while the other, led by Lazar Mutap and Madeja Nenadović, routed the Ottoman artillery. Kulin Kapetan, who was still in the midst of fighting, now came face to face with Luka Lazarević, and the 2 commanders began a duel. They both shot at each other with their pistols but missed. Then, Kulin Kapetan struck the Serbian commander, badly injuring him, but before he could kill him, a Serbian soldier, confused in the fighting, aimed at Kulin Kapetan and shot him dead. The other cavalry contingent now pressed towards Skopjak's tent, inspired by the Battle of Kosovo 417 years prior, in which Serbs killed the Ottoman Sultan. Skopjak's personal guard quickly organized itself and stopped the cavalry contingent, but the Ottomans fighting in the fortifications began to panic and retreat in disarray. The Serbian infantry now left their fortifications and began to run after the retreating enemy to increase their losses and take revenge for the plundering of their land that the Ottoman soldiers caused. Skopjak left some of his troops in Šabac while he retreated. Nevertheless, on the road back to Bosnia, the Ottoman army was ambushed in the forest Kitok, where the Serbs took back lots of stolen loot. Serbian losses are modest. Ottoman losses, although not so severe at first, greatly increased during the rout and then retreat. The panic was on some accounts so great that they even fled into Habsburg territory to save their lives. Karađorđe has won his most brilliant victory yet that earned him respect across Europe of 1806, even gaining respect from Napoleon Bonaparte himself, who initially aided Ottomans in this offensive, giving his French artillery officers to help the Ottomans. He would not intervene again. However, the Ottoman army of Niš advanced forward during Karađorđe's campaigns west. They took Aleksinac and Sokobanja and now prepared to strike the fortifications at Deligrad. Karađorđe immediately went there with his army to join the defense of Deligrad. Ottomans had a numerical advantage, but not as much of an advantage as at Mišar, most likely 55,000 against 37,000. Regardless, they charged at the enemy fortification, believing it would be enough. They fired from 14 cannons simultaneously to weaken the Serbian position, but the rebels stood their ground and repulsed the attack. Then, they charged again, but this time, they attacked the flanks. Their plan was to thin out the Serbian defenders. The Serbian army expected this, and they saw that the Ottoman army was entirely committed to the fighting. Serbian cavalry charged down the Ottoman flanks on both sides. Caught by surprise, they began to retreat just like at Mišar. Serbian casualties are around 3,000, while casualties of the Ottoman army was in some sources reported as high as 30,000. It could be the combined number of wounded, missing, captured and killed during the battle and retreat. However, it should still be treated with great caution. After these two battles, Serbs managed to negotiate a peace treaty with the Ottoman Council in Constantinople. It is known as Ichko's Peace. However, in Europe, Russia has entered the war with the Ottoman Empire. Due to the Ottoman Sultan removing pro-Russian governors in Wallachia and Moldavia. Encouraged by this, Serbs met at Smederevo and decided that they would no longer recognize Ottoman authority, reject Ichko's peace, and set their goal to capture Belgrade before the end of 1806. And so, at the very end of the year, the Serbs launched an assault at Belgrade. They had 25,000 troops, while the Ottoman garrison had 16,000, but 300 cannons to 40 cannons of Serbs. First, Konda Bimbaša, who knew how to speak Turkish, went to one of the gates to a city with a couple of his men. There, he convinced the guards to let them in, and once they did, he slaughtered the guards and signaled the rest of the army to attack. Vasa Čarapić, the most important commander in the region around Belgrade, led an attack on the main city gate. He was killed during the charge and became a martyr for the cause. Soon, all 4 gates to the city were opened and in rebel hands. The Ottomans began to retreat towards the fortress. However, they soon surrendered and left the city. With this, the Sanjak of Smederevo was free from Ottoman forces, and now the Serbs are getting ready for a joint offensive with the Russians towards the southeast. Across the liberated lands, councils will be formed, laws will be drafted, and the foundations for a national and cultural awakening will be set.